Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be changing the brake pads on a 2018 Chevy Suburban. All right, let's go ahead and get started. First thing, while it's still on the ground, we're going to use a 22mm socket and loosen the lug nuts. Maybe. Okay, now that we've got the lug nuts loosened a little bit, we're going to jack it up and then take the lug nuts off and take the wheel off the rest of the way. So what we're aiming for is right here. Okay. Now we've got this lifted up high enough where the wheel spins. So we're going to take these lug nuts the rest of the way out. Alright, now pull the wheel over here, get it out of the way. Okay, so this is what we're going for. We got to take these brakes off. There's two bolts we need to take off. This bolt here, and then there's a bolt down here. And this is a 19mm socket. All right, so now we have a caliper hanger. I'll put a link in the description on where you can get one of these. But basically we're going to hang this on the spring right here and then hang the caliper on it to get it out of the way so we can work on getting these brake pads off. Depending on how old your pads are, they could be really hard to get this caliper off. So you really gotta work at it. Sometimes it's nice to have a little hammer, and if you'll just tap on it, give it a little bit of, just let it know you're there. Another thing you can do is take a flat blade screwdriver and put it in between the rotor and the pad and kind of give it a little, just move it a little bit. It kind of gives you some leverage. There we go. Now we busted it loose. Okay, so now we're going to take this top bolt hole and hook it on our caliper hanger. And just make sure watch the brake lines. Okay, so now these brake pads should just slide out of these clips. All right, so that's the front one. What I usually do is I set them down in the right orientation. So that's front and that's back, because you'll notice the back one is a little different. It's flat on the bottom. So if you can remember that, then you don't necessarily have to do this, but I always like to make a visual so I can remember. And so our new brake pads come with new clips, so we're going to replace those as well. But before we do, we're going to put some brake grease on the backs of these to keep them from, just in case, it's a good idea so they don't squeak, brakes don't squeak. Okay, so now I got a little bit of brake grease, and I use synthetic brake grease, and like I said, I just put a little bit on here on the backs of this. We're gonna go ahead and put this one in. Okay, let's take this one out. So as you can see, here's the new pad, here's the old pad. I don't know if you can see this, but there's a little metal piece right there that's your warning indicator. And once that starts hitting the rotor, it'll start to make a noise so that you know you definitely need new brakes. You don't want to wait for that long though. And so here's the new one. So you can see that has a lot more meat on it. All right, so now I wanted to say real quick, in this case, I'm not going to replace the rotor, but if you need to replace the rotor, there are two screws you have to take out, and they're right back here. There's one right here, you see that? And then there's one right here on top. And those are 18mm and they are torqued to about 175 foot-pounds. So those are going to be really hard to get out by just jacking up the vehicle. If you had a lift where you could pick it up and maybe get a little bit more torque under it, because it's real tight in here and it's hard to get any kind of pneumatic tools or anything like that behind it. But anyway, just as a heads up, if you're going to replace that, those are the 2 bolts you take off, and that'll remove this assembly. Then you need to remove this Torx screw here, and then that's it. And then this will come out. You slides off. You slide the new one on. Put this bolt that holds it in. Put those 2 bolts back in. Tighten them again to 175 foot-pounds, and then you're back to where we are now. Okay, so I'm gonna start with the back, and I like to put brake grease on these 2 parts that are gonna slide in and out of the brake, the clips we just put on. And this brake grease stuff that I'm using, you can get it almost anywhere at your favorite parts store. There'll usually be a little display at the cash register that has these hanging up. That's usually where I pick it up. I don't do enough brake jobs to get a whole full container of it, but if you do that, you can get that. Okay, so I said I usually like to put it in at the top and then slide the bottom in. That's usually, I find, to work the best. And so then I go ahead and just push them to where they're up against the rotor. All right, so now we need to compress these pistons, these 2 pistons here, so that this will fit back on top. Because as you saw, my old brake pads were so thin that we need to that it was pushed out, so this won't actually fit on there. So what I usually do is I try to watch the line here, make sure it's not all twisted up. And so when I set it right on top, and I've got this tool, and again I'll show you, it's a brake caliper compressor. You can use a C-clamp and an old brake pad. That'll do the same thing. I used to do that. I've done that for a long time too. But this actually works a lot nicer, and it's easier to do kind of while you're here by yourself. But basically you just put an old brake pad in the caliper, and you put it on one side, one piston side, and then you just tighten it up, and it slowly compresses that piston back in. So now while I'm doing this, brake fluid is going from here through this line all the way back up into the master cylinder. And so as we slowly compress this, we're just doing this slow, and every so often I kind of stand up and look up here at my master cylinder and make sure my brake fluid is still in a good place. So here's the max line right here, and there's the min line. So as I compress that caliper, it's going to move this fluid up, and so we just want to make sure we don't get up to the max. If you do, basically take the lid off and you can siphon some of that fluid out, because you want it to be in the right range. And because I've got dual pistons here, or 2 pistons here, sometimes I'll move this over to the other side and just make sure I'm pushing this in even, because you don't want to have one piston go in and the other one not. And you always want to use an old brake pad here, because you don't want this to damage the piston, and then you also don't want to put a new brake pad in here obviously and do this with, because you're marring up the pad. All right, so now we're good. Let's take that out. So again, want to make sure we're not twisting up the line here, the brake line. Let's go ahead and get rid of this caliper hanger. And then slide this back on, just like that. Okay, now I'm going to get your torque wrench out, and you want to torque these to 70 foot-pounds. Okay, So now you notice there's some play in here. And the reason that is because we compress that piston all the way back. And so when you get in your car, and we'll show this, but you want to get in the car, and after you start it, you want to push the brakes in a few times to get these pistons to lock in. So the first time you stop when you're going, it doesn't take so much to get those pads up against this rotor. Make sure you got everything. We got those bolts put back in. We got them torqued. Everything on here is tight. Hub still spins. So we're good to put the wheel back on. Like I said, just double check and make sure you got everything and didn't forget everything. All right, so with tires, what I usually do is I get them pretty close here, and then I'll get them spun the right way, and I put my feet under it to kind of help lift the tire with my feet so that I can get it on those lugs. And then this part's real important too. You want to make sure you spin these on by hand. Otherwise, you could get them cross-threaded. And if you notice, this one's already, looks like someone already cross-threaded this one. All right, so now I want to try to get it fairly tight here while it's in the air, if you can. And make sure you do this. You want to tighten these in a star pattern. And again, I'm putting my foot under here to keep the wheel from spinning. But just kind of, you know, move from here up to here. So it's sliding onto the assembly evenly. If you do it like this, you've got a potential, if you do it around, it has a potential to pull this one tighter, and then you could later have problems. So you want to make sure to tighten this in a star pattern. Okay, now we're going to lower it onto the ground so it'll not be spinning, and then we'll do the final torque. Okay, so now we're going to remove the jack stand and slowly let the wheel down. This is a 22 millimeter socket, and we're going to torque this to 140 foot-pounds. Again, make sure you do this using the star pattern as well. All right, so last thing we want to check is make sure that our brake fluid's good, and we're right here, the max is right there, so we're in good shape. All right, now let's go hit the pedal a few times. So before you start it, you want to push the pedal all the way to the floor. And what that's going to do is it's going to fill those brake lines and then you should feel it give you some resistance back once you do it again. All right, so now we're going to start it up, and as we push the brakes, we're going to see it goes all the way to the floor again. And so then we're just going to keep pumping them until they feel normal like they did before. And so now we're good. So now that we've done all that, we're going to test the brakes, make sure we're good. So that's it. Thanks for watching. If you need to change the brakes on a 2018 Chevy Suburban, that's how you do it.